Panzer, what yeah? My name is Peatr Thomas. I'm a full-time artist. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we can make some stencils, and I'm going to show you where I get my inspiration from. Here are some examples of some canvases that I painted using stencils and spray paint. You can use like a sponge or brush if you want. It all depends on the type of material you make your stencil out of. Most acrylics will work if you're going to use a plastic film stencil. If you're going to use a paper one, like I'm going to show you today, it's best to use spray paints for that. Some of the ways I get my inspiration are some rock paintings up the river back home. There are some images you can make out, animals, canoes, things like that. But there are some symbols that we don't know exactly what they mean. Those ones are a little bit more interesting to me. So I'm going to be making some stencils out of those. Some other things I use for inspiration are things from my culture, where I come from, which is the 7 teachings. So some of the tools you're going to be needing today is an Exacto Knife. This one here has retractable blade. And you're going to need a pencil. And you'll also need some paper. This is poster paper. The thicker the paper, the better, but not too thick. One other thing I forgot to mention is we need a cutting mat. If you don't have a cutting mat, you could find a piece of plywood that will also work well. Just be mindful of slivers and whatnot. Just be mindful of the surface you're cutting on, because the knife will cut through and you don't want to damage the table that you're working on. So we could make a huge stencil out of this huge piece of paper. Depends on the size of your stencil. What we're going to do is we're actually going to cut this paper into 4. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so now I have my piece of paper cut out from the poster board. You'll notice on your poster board there might be a shiny side and a more flat surface, or matte as some people say. You want to be drawing on the flatter side. Reason being is the pencil just works a lot better on the flatter side. For a stencil, so this image here, no one knows what it is. Some people say it's a bird, some people say it's a person. We're not really sure. Some people say it's a star. We're gonna make a stencil out of this, and this is gonna be just a freehanding stencil. You could use a ruler to get your straighter lines, but for now I'm just gonna freehand it. So there we go. Now, some things to note when you're using your Exacto knife. If yours has the plastic cover, you always want to have the plastic cover on when you're not using your knife. Reason being, if you leave it open like this and somebody comes along, they don't know the knife is there, or they slip, you don't want them to accidentally cut themselves, because nobody wants to get hurt. This one I have here has a retractable cover, which is nice because I always lose the lid. Don't lose your lid. So when you're using an Exacto knife, things to think about. It doesn't work like a pencil, so you can't go left and right. You always want to have the blade kind of pulling towards the line that you're going to cut, because if you veer off, the blade's going to want to follow which way you're guiding it. For example, I'm just going to poke it in here, and I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure and pull it back, just like that. Always be mindful of where your blade is going to go. Make sure your hands are clear. I'm just going to poke it and then pull back. You want to keep your blade at, let's say, a 40-degree angle. Basically the way you hold a pencil, and kind of just drag it back. And there's our first cutout. I'm going to retract the blade. If you have a cover, you want to put the cover on. Put that to the side. And here's my first stencil. You want to keep your negative. Sometimes you can use these. This is a painting that I did, but let's say I just printed out an image. It could be an animal or whatever inspires you. In this case, I just want the image, the outline of Sitting Bull right here. Another way we can transfer this to make it a stencil is by cutting it out. When you're cutting curves, like let's say around the head here, you have to turn your blade with the curve that you're cutting. Otherwise, you're not going to get a clean cut. So I'm curving my hand. I'm going nice and slow. There's no rush. I'm not putting a ton of pressure on it, but just enough pressure so that I know that it's going through. And so retract your blade, almost forgot. So now that you have your image cut out of whatever you want, you could get your piece of paper. What we're gonna do now is just trace around your stencil with the pencil. And then there's an easy way to transfer an image. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this. Nice little corner, and there we go. There's our stencil. So another way that I make the stencil is just straight up tracing. So this image here is 2 tomahawks. I designed this. This was a sticker that I had some years ago. So you can trace over your image. If you're using a monitor, you want to be extra careful of how much pressure you put onto the screen. You don't want to put too much because you could potentially damage it, but you just want to draw just super lightly, enough that you can see your line. Because I'm using my iPad, my fingers does enable the touchscreen underneath. So I'm going to use, you could use an eraser or whatever to kind of hold it down as you're tracing. So there we go. Not an exact match. I am going to go in and do a little bit more details. What I'm doing right now is kind of marking out where I'm going to start and stop cutting. Example, I'm going to have this tomahawk be a solid line, and this one, to make it look like behind, I'm giving it some space. So this paper I'm not cutting, and I'm going to have a little channel in there. Well, let's call it a bridge, and I'll give the stencil a lot more stability. A perfect example of a bridge and why it's important is, let's say I want to cut the letter O. Okay, let's draw the inside. I have the letter O. Let's say I cut this out. Let's say I cut this part out. What's going to happen to this inside? Inside is just going to fall out, right? So what's important is to have some bridges. So I'm going to give this a couple of bridges right there. So now I have my paper. The paper is channeling through the bridge, and it's going to hold the inner piece. So now that I want to cut this out, the middle piece is going to stay in there rather than falling out. So now I'm going to cut out my tomahawks. And there's our tomahawk stencil. So let's say, for example, I accidentally cut one of the bridges, just like this. If you want to fix it, what you're going to need is to find some packing tape. So what I'm going to do is take some smaller pieces, and I'm just going to tape right over it, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to tape exactly right over the same spot. If the tape doesn't line up, that's perfectly fine. So now what you're going to do is cut away the tape that you don't need. And there we go. Stencil is fixed. I'm actually going to use this roll of tape to make a bigger circle. And that is how to find inspiration and make a stencil with using 3 different techniques. You can find other videos of me where I show you how to apply the stencil to a canvas. There's another video where I can show you how to make the canvas, as well as you can find many other videos from other amazing artists at inPath.ca. My name is Peatr Thomas, and I'll say that much for now.